Good afternoon. What I want to do today is to talk about and give a little bit of information about the National Farmers Union, the organisation I work for, give you some information to put agriculture into context and talk about the safety performance of agriculture, discuss some barriers to change and what we are doing as an organisation to really try and improve the safety performance of agriculture and the safety of our members. So what is the National Farmers Union? The National Farmers Union is the trade association representing 55,000 farmers in England and Wales who operate 46,000 businesses. We are the organisation which champions British agriculture and tries to create the conditions for thriving and successful agricultural businesses. What we're not, and what sometimes people get confused with, we are not a traditional trade union. We're not along the likes of Unite, Unison or GMB. Farming businesses in England and Wales vary in size. They vary from businesses which farm thousands of acres, have multi-million-pound turnovers and have multiple employees, down literally to self-employed people in their own business with no one else working for them. So there's a real variety of businesses and members that we deal with. Agriculture. Agriculture is the bedrock of an agri-food sector which is worth £122 billion to the UK economy. It's a sector which employs 4 million people, and it's the biggest manufacturing sector in the UK. It's bigger than aerospace or car manufacturing. And agriculture, our members, produce the primary ingredients which support that industry. It's our members who produce the wheat which goes in your bread, the meat which goes on your table for Sunday lunch, and the fruit and vegetables which we all should be eating more of. Now, I said that the agri-food sector employs about 4 million people. The number of people employed directly in agriculture is considerably smaller. It's around about 455,000 people, which represents about 1.5% of the UK workforce. However, even though we're not the biggest employer in the UK, we are the industry which persistently has the worst safety record of any industrial sector in the UK. It's the worst record when you look at absolute numbers. For the last reporting year, which is 2018-2019, agriculture had 32 fatalities. Usually, construction is slightly higher than agriculture. But looking at absolute numbers is not the best way to actually judge the performance of agriculture compared to other industries. Because if you remember this morning, Sarah said that construction employs around about 7% of the workforce. Agriculture employs 1.5% of the workforce. So to get a true comparison between different industries, a good way to do that is to look at injury rates per 100,000 people employed. And on that slide, you can see that if you use that measure of injury rates, fatal injury rates per 100,000 people employed, agriculture is the worst performer. This slide brings those figures and displays them on their own. Now, this poor performance of agriculture is not something which happened last year. It's not something which happened the year before. It's something which has happened persistently over a number of years. If you go back 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you will see the same sort of figures reflected. What are the causes of fatal accidents on farm? The major causes of fatal accidents are incidents involving transport, involving moving vehicles. Not surprisingly, given that it's agriculture, incidents involving livestock, primarily cattle, feature quite prominently. But always in the top 3, falls from height features as one of the major causes of injury in agriculture. When it comes to non-fatal injuries, The major causes are slightly different. Slips and trips on a level surface is the major cause. Injury involving animals, but also falls from height. It's the third biggest cause, accounting for 12% of workplace accidents. And to put that in numbers, last year that was around about 831 farmers suffered an injury, a non-fatal injury from working at height. Again, the causes of fatal accidents in farming haven't changed over the years. If you go back 5, 10, 15 years, it's the same things which come up. It's transport, it's livestock, and it's working at height. As the causes haven't changed over the years, the solutions haven't changed either. The solutions, in my view, are very often easy to implement, very cost effective. They just don't get put into place. To give you some examples, every year farmers are run over by their own vehicle. That means somebody gets out of an agricultural vehicle, goes in front of it or goes behind it, the vehicle moves and they get run over. That can be stopped by putting the brake on. It doesn't cost a penny to do that. Every year people lose their lives because they don't put a helmet on when they use an ATV. Now, there's a bit of a cost to buying a helmet. It might cost you 40 quid, but in my view, £40, if it's going to save your life, is a good investment. And every year, lives can be saved if farmers avoided working at height, if farmers avoided using equipment rigged up ad hoc to gain access. For example, using a pallet on a fork truck to lift themselves up, or a potato box lifted up by a telehandler. The solutions are there. So the question to ask, I think, is that if the solutions are there to solve the causes of accidents, why haven't they been put into play? Now, if you talk to farmers and to others in this industry, they'll often say, well, farming's different. It's different to other industries. First of all, we've got open workplaces. Many farms have got public rights of way going through their fields. Many farms have got a right of way going through the farmyard. You don't get the public in construction sites. You do on a farmyard. Farms are often situated next door to the farmhouse. So you get the presence of vulnerable children and other people, which you just don't get in other industries. Farmers don't retire very often. It's not uncommon to see people working in the industry beyond 65, up to 70, 80. I've talked to members who are 90 who are still active farmers. Also, farmers have got a real gung-ho. If it's a job to be done and I can do it, I'll do it. But I think that one of the major barriers to change and improving the safety record in agriculture is behaviours, attitudes and culture, which needs to change. Behaviours such as not securing a vehicle to stop it from moving. Attitudes such as, I think accidents are inevitable and there's nothing I can do to improve safety. And a culture which thinks it's not cool to wear high vis or other PPE, or to put a helmet on. Now, saying that the solutions is easy. It's a much harder job to actually put them into practice and get change. If we are going to change attitudes, behaviours and cultures in agriculture, a starting point, I think, is to better understand how people approach risk, what attitudes they have and what behaviours that they have. And the HSE has done some research on this to try and work out what are the barriers to stop people involved in agriculture improving their safety performance. Now, if you try and talk to everybody who works in agriculture on an individual basis, you'll get nowhere because you'll be talking to 55,000 people in our membership. But if you can try and work out segments, if you can try and work out groups that apply to a large proportion where there's some commonality, then you've got much more chance of being able to work out what messages work and get those messages directed properly. And that's what the HSE did. They researched, they interviewed about 1,800 farmers, and they discovered that farmers could be split into 4 main groupings. People who could be classed as planners, pragmatists, people who are risk takers, and those who just really aren't very clear about what they need to do to manage health and safety. So some of the attitudes that people who are classed as planners have are that they are the least likely to take risks, and they are worried about safety and consequences of accidents on farms. This translates into behaviours where they do risk management. They are less likely to do things where they haven't got the skills or the equipment to carry them out safely. And not surprisingly, this group suffers fewer accidents. There's a group called pragmatists. Now, these are least worried about risk and consequences, but they do have relatively safe behaviours. And they are worried about keeping themselves safe. This manifests itself in behaviours whereby they've got comparatively decent risk management, and they are relatively unlikely to take risks to save time. Risk takers. These people are the most likely to enjoy risks, but they worry about consequences. They worry about the consequences of death and injury, but they still undertake behaviours that they know are risky. They're most likely to consider that accidents are inevitable, which is something which I don't agree with. And they're most likely to undertake tasks where they know that they don't have the right skills or equipment to deal with them. And not surprisingly, they're likely to have accidents. The last group is unclears. Now, for these, experiences, attitudes, is that they're relatively cautious about their daily lives, but they feel least safe in work on farm. And they're the least likely to know about risks on farm. And they're most likely to agree it's easy to forget when being safe, when busy. This manifests itself in behaviours. For example, they're the ones who do the least risk management, and the most likely to work when they're sick or injured or tired. Now, the HSE research shows that these different groups respond in different ways to messages. Emotive messages, ones which are quite graphic, they work well with pragmatists and risk takers. However, people who are unclear disengage from those emotive messages. What they need are messages which are more supportive. And the same applies for people, unclears need messages which are supportive. So, when it comes to the different types of messages that are available, all message types would work well for planners, because they reinforce what they already know, and it helps them manage risk better. Pragmatists are not worried by consequences, and therefore emotive messages would be key for this segment, because it's to make the catastrophic consequences of accidents clear. But for unclears, specific supportive messages are the ones which are going to work the best. So this can manifest itself in different types of messages which are going to appeal more to different types of segments. So for planners, what you're saying is that you're right to risk assess bailing and to say I'll email you some tools. For people who are unclear, you want to be supportive and say things like, well, I found it easy to manage those electric pylons on the field. I'll show you what I did. But for risk takers, you need to be much more assertive and say, stop using that ladder. It will kill you. The HSE are using this research and applying it in the messaging which goes out to agriculture. The latest guidance is a document called What a Good Farm Looks Like. And what they've decided to do is to tailor their messaging to really go towards supporting those people who fall into the risk taker and the unclear categories. To use those messages which are supportive. Those type of messages appeal most to the risk takers and those in the unclear categories, but they won't do any harm to those people who are classed as pragmatists and planners. And what we've tried to do is to take that understanding about different messages applying to different people and apply it to our own messaging, which we're putting out to our members. And again, we are focusing attention onto those people who fall into the unclear and to risk-taker categories. Not that we want to ignore people who are in pragmatists and planners, because although they have fewer accidents, they are still going to be subject to accidents. However, messaging is only one way to get in front of our members and to try and nudge changes in attitudes and behaviours. We're using a variety of methods. We produce guidance, which we supply to our members. We've got a telephone helpline service which our members can ring up and speak to somebody directly and to gain practical advice. We're also using industry leaders, influencers on social media platforms which appeal to farmers to try and act as role models to nudge and change attitudes and behaviours. As an organisation, we have set ourselves an ambitious target. We have set ourselves the target of trying to reduce accidents, fatal accidents, by 50% in the next 5 years. That target's entirely achievable. It's achievable because a lot of the measures, a lot of solutions, are easy to implement and very cost effective. As I said, it doesn't cost very much to put your handbrake on every time you get out of a vehicle. What we need to do is to change those attitudes and behaviours and nudge people towards improving what they do on a day-to-day practical basis. We don't think it's going to be an easy job, but we think it is one which is entirely achievable. I don't know whether those of you who are a bit older, you will remember perhaps when the requirement to wear seatbelts came in. There was a lot of resistance. I remember my dad just leaving the belt hanging by the side of him. But now, every time you get in the car, it's probably the first thing that you do. It's an automatic, natural thing for you to put that seatbelt on. There's been a big change in the way that we behave and our attitudes towards wearing a seatbelt. And it's that sort of change which we want to try and replicate in our industry. Thank you very much.